I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is Kyle Walsh with RCR Wireless News. Thank you for attending today's webinar, The Journey Through Maturing a Mobile Strategy, Best Practices to Deploy Secure Archivable Business Apps, presented by CellTrust. Our presenters today are Jeff McGrath, Senior Director, Product Marketing at Good Technology, and Brian Panicko, Senior Vice President, Global Sales Strategy at CellTrust. At this time, I'd like to pass the presentation over to Brian.
Great, thank you, and thank you to the audience for attending today's webinar. We're excited to be able to present our information. Just to give you an idea of how we're going to go about it, this is Brian speaking. I will actually present the beginning portions of the webinar, then turning over to Jeff McGrath to discuss a little bit more in detail some of the stuff that Good Technology provides. To start, I wanted to just kind of open you guys up to a journey. And the journey that we're talking on really involves the adoption of mobility into your business today. Many organizations have struggled in terms of this balance between security and productivity and compliance. So we're going to touch on a number of those topics. As I was introduced, my name is Brian Panicko. I'm our Senior Vice President of Sales at the CellTrust Corporation. So why adopt a mobile strategy? Well, because your employees, your customers, your partners, your vendors, et cetera, are all constantly connected. I think as time has gone by, the line between work and personal continues to get blurred as employees start to work on nights and weekends and even on vacations. Mobile device ownership means that workers have the ability to remain connected to work at all times, which is resulted in the expectations that workers should also be reachable at all times. Now, if your business doesn't have a BYOD policy in place, you're already behind. Businesses are increasingly putting on things like remote wipe and encryption softwares on personal devices, as well as mobile virtual workspaces that separate this work data and personal data in either encrypted areas or personal areas, which means that if we haven't addressed it yet, most of your mobile workforce is already mobile, so it's time to start moving on these things. So why do the employees want mobile? Well, for the most part, it's pretty simple, because they have their mobile devices at all times, because they know and they're confident that this makes them more efficient to use these tools, and because they typically, are utilizing these on their personal time now, which can be seen as, maybe an intrusion to the employee, but almost now an expectation. Mobile devices empower mobile workers to work where, when, and how they choose. Increasingly, work is something people do rather than a place someone goes. Actually, a Cisco survey talked about 3 out of 5 workers saying they don't need to be in the office to be productive, and actually that they're more productive when they are out of the office. Gartner even forecasts that 70% of mobile professionals will work from their own smart devices by 2018. So this shift is happening very, very rapidly. Communications are the key part of business, because without it, productivity is hampered. But with it, combined with secure business process tools, teams are actually able to collaborate more effectively, saving time and closing this mobile productivity gap. So let's look at what's going on in the market today. Many organizations have either began to aggressively migrate from their corporate-owned legacy devices into either corporate liable iOS devices and or BYOD programs. By providing the workforce these device types and operating systems that their users are comfortable with, expectations are that employees can communicate and collaborate better, while the company provides a competitive advantage resulting in more revenue and greater profits. As they push towards this, many start to realize that they need to listen to the demands of their field employees who are needing to be better served through mobility. So now let's look at some of the challenges. Today, there's individual solutions for voice and text and email, or even combined offerings that put all of these 3 main tools into one device. However, to date, there hasn't been much in the way of a fully integrated solution for BYOD devices in particular that can support not just secure email, but voice and text as well. Designed to do these things seamlessly and operating on various devices, especially iOS and Android. Well, most companies have embraced mobility and enterprise mobility from a mobile device management or MDM perspective. They're realizing really quickly that the device control methodology leaves them short of their core aspects for mobility, which is specifically the apps. Now, Jeff McGrath in his portion of the presentation is going to get in a lot more detail on that. I want to finish by saying there is a risk inherent in opening up the corporate assets to mobile devices and apps due to these regulatory audits and issues that can be compounded by mobility. So there are a lot of things that are kind of weighing you down in this hill and going in that direction, from compliance to risk to audits. So you get yourself into this situation as an organization to try to figure out how to balance happy and productive employees that get to use their personal devices with the control and compliance that is demanded from the regulatory bodies. So I think what you see is traditionally there was this opposition of security and convenience. And the most secure type applications typically ended up resulting in a user experience and end user feedback that was very poor. But I think what you've seen today is that productivity, particularly around BYOD environments, becomes so much more important. And it ultimately seems that in order to achieve this balance between these happy employees and also get that convenience side, you've got to consider different things. Opening up mobility to devices and to BYOD, or are you going to stick with your corporate liable strategy, or are you going to put together some type of hybrid model? Well, it seems like in order to get this balance between happy, productive, and safe users, it can be really difficult between just the wild, wild west of mobility and the iron fist control of corporate liable, lockdown, one OS devices. So I think that there's a trade-off, and typically this trade-off has been giving up some security in order to complement this productivity, but I think what we found today is now these things can exist in complete harmony. This balance is possible through tailoring the needs of your organization, be it BYOD, corporate liable, or both, be it iOS, Android, or both, hosted or on-premise in terms of where you're storing the data. And it can and should include all aspects of mobile communications, which is voice, SMS, and email. I use the story typically when I'm in the field, spend a ton of time in New York City with financial organizations, and if I'm in the back of a cab, the most important things to me are email, voice, and text. And typically in financial services, it's interesting that by policy, they've made it that you can't text and you can't have voice calls from your mobile device. So I think embracing these different technologies allows clearly for more productive workers. So let's talk a little bit on what we call the secure mobile communication value chain. I think it's very important to establish your strategy. And this takes time from your key groups within your organization, from compliance to IT to your mobility folks, even to the finance folks, to define a policy that has initiatives to make your employees more productive, maintain your security levels, and even see some benefit from cost savings. When you've determined this strategy, you're really looking into devices as well. The role of the device manufacturer is truly to secure the device at a hardware level. So, folks like Apple have spent considerable amounts of time in their configurator and opening it up more to the enterprise. And Samsung, with pieces they put together with Knox, become a very powerful offering. The next true consideration that you need to have is your enterprise mobility management strategy. And this goes far beyond MDM and controlling devices, but really focuses more on managing and securing the data on these devices through containerization and applications, and ultimately making these things collaborative, which again, Jeff is going to spend a lot more time speaking about. Finally, to complete the story, you need the other two most important components of a mobile device, which are SMS and voice. Where CellTrust comes in is we allow for secure and encrypted SMS and voice communication inside of a network, while allowing all communications going outside of your network to be archivable for e-discovery purposes. So specifically, really to highlight what this may look like in an enterprise environment is looking at what CellTrust and a BYOD really looks like. You know, it gives you this separation that your end users are definitely looking for, from keeping my personal. I don't want my work to see text messages that I'm sending to my wife, or potentially coworker or messages or pictures that I'm sharing with my friends. With the CellTrust solution inside a good container environment, organizations can place this containerized set of applications on a work side of the phone, providing for an encrypted database of all the information, remote wipe capabilities, and most importantly in the case of CellTrust, a second business phone number. So the SIM card remains the personal phone number of the user, while the CellTrust mobile business number becomes the business's number. When this employee leaves and keeps their personal device, the good technology administrator will simply take the containerized apps away from that user, and ultimately can even from a CellTrust perspective assign that phone number to the replacement for that individual. So there's a lot of power that's in that. The other piece to strongly note is activity that allows businesses to communicate with other apps. When you're thinking about this user experience, it's oh so critical today for them to be able to go from one application to the other application in a seamless fashion. For example, let's take a situation where an employee could be reading an email, then wants to start a real-time text conversation with the sender of that email. With the use of good technology and good work, I can jump right from that email into a text by clicking the contact. Then if I'm engaging in this conversation, maybe there's a URL that gets sent to me in text. If I click that URL, it'll automatically pull up the good secure browser, which if that web address has been deemed from the administrator that they shouldn't be able to access this, it'll be denied. Or it will go into the web browser where a history of these websites can be kept. Finally, let's just say inside that web browser there's a phone number. You can click that phone number and the CellTrust voice application will seamlessly be pulled up, just as it would in your regular phone. The beautiful part about all this is all of the data and communications stay inside of this container, never leaking, and all communications are logged and archived for e-discovery and compliance purposes. I want to kind of finish up by just recommending that organizations should truly embrace their ecosystem. And this ecosystem commonly comes from different sources, right? Your users are asking for particular things in terms of the device types they want to use. You know, having relationships with your carrier networks, embracing the enterprise mobility management space, and ultimately choosing solutions that are fully archivable for e-discovery purposes becomes critical. CellTrust has developed formal partnerships with players in all of these kind of categories and allows for this seamless integration from carrier connections to over 800 carriers in the world. You know, and again, ability to have this second mobile business number on BYOD devices and relaying this information off to the archive providers. So with that being said, I wanted to tee off Jeff McGrath. I'll let Jeff introduce himself, but really I think what I wanted to illustrate is kind of the selections and choices that you kind of have to make when deciding your mobile strategy. And as you could see, the CellTrust app within the good containerized environment certainly fills that need for SMS and voice, where again, Jeff is going to concentrate on, you know, giving you guys a little bit more information on containerization and the environment. So Jeff, feel free to take it away.
Thank you very much, Brian. For those of you that are not familiar with good technology, we've been in the secure mobility space for over 15 years. Many of you may know us from Good for Enterprise, which was really the first secure containerized email application. We have since moved into being a 4-time Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for MDM and now called Enterprise Mobility Management, where we can support device management, mobile application management, and your need for secure collaboration apps. Brian was just talking about CellTrust Secure Line, which in itself is a very in-demand app in our customer base, providing a secure virtual line for secure archivable phone calls and SMS messaging, even on personal devices. And so when you look broader at organizations of all sizes, there's a huge demand as customers have gotten MDM with email on their device, and now they're asking for all types of business applications. You can see here some primary research we conducted middle of last year, and we looked at companies of less than $1 billion in revenue, so SMB, mid-market sized organizations, and even at small organizations that you would think would, maybe not necessarily be a laggard with new technologies, emerging technologies like mobile application management and deploying secure mobile apps. You can see here that, almost a quarter are planning to deploy 6 or more apps in this calendar year. And that over 80% in all are planning on deploying mobile apps during the calendar year 2015. Next slide. Digging a little deeper, this is some information from a Forrester workforce survey from about a year ago. And when you started to delve into the types of applications that organizations want to deploy on mobile, clearly Word and Excel document editing, was number one. Almost half of all organizations responding indicated they want to deploy Word and Excel editing. And really, the genesis of mobile as a big demand by users starts with the email attachment. Once they start getting email attachments on their device, hence the need for SharePoint and file share access and Word and document editing. Secondly, greater than 1 in 3 were demanding role-specific apps, primarily mobile CRM. One of the roles that we see in organizations that is always the top of the priority list for mobilization are sales organizations, because there's the belief that mobilizing sales teams can lead to shorter sales cycles and better customer experiences. And as you can see here, greater than a third wanted role-based access, like, for example, mobile CRM. And sometimes when you get to applications like CRM, it becomes a little more problematic because of the sensitivity around having customer information on a mobile device, right? Due to A, the regulatory nature of that information, but also B, right, the proprietary information. You don't want a sales guy leaving the organization, taking that customer list with him, or a lost device being picked up and that information, gets cracked off of the device. Next slide, please. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about what we see as the typical mobile journey that good customers undertake as they progress from stage to stage. It all starts on the left-hand side with EMM, what we might have called MDM in the past, and messaging. So you deploy MDM, it allows you to configure Exchange ActiveSync to get native email on the device, and usually it starts with an executive or some other high priority or critical employee bringing his new iPad or new iPhone to the office and saying, IT, I want this done. And they're not really in a position to say no. And so your InfoSec team, your audit team may be willing to give a pass for that high-ranking official inside the organization. But then, that begets more people saying, hey, I see that this executive has email, I want it too. Or it begets, hey, great, I love having email, I need these applications as well. Hey, I'm the SVP of sales and I want my sales team fully mobilized. Well, what we typically see then is kind of an inflection point where IT and InfoSec and audit have to take a step back and say, you know what, we allowed this initially, but now as we start, we can't just open the spigot and let all the apps come through the faucet, right? We need to really look at what security controls and we've adopted for our regulatory requirements on the traditional desktop environment and see how we now apply that to mobile. One more time. And so what's happening now is as organizations try to go from MDM and email to mobile application management and apps, they're kind of being held up now by InfoSec and IT audit. Even if it's a very high demand, high priority project, they're being held up as they kind of catch their breath and start to strategize. What is our security posture on mobile? Do we have the controls in place to protect data, but also to protect, many of these apps are leveraging back-end systems behind the firewall. How do we protect the configuration information around those internal servers and the credentials, right, the authentication in place to protect user access to those systems? Next slide. So with that, I'd like to do a quick poll question. With respect to your mobile maturity within your organization, are you A, not using MDM or email yet? Are you B, using commercial MDM tool that's enabling you to have mobile email? Are you C, moving beyond MDM and mobile email to other collaborative apps like file share access or secure enterprise instant messaging? D, are you mobilizing existing business processes with off-the-shelf apps, maybe from your enterprise application vendor or from a container vendor like Good? And lastly, are you writing custom apps to transform business processes? Let's give it a minute while these polls come in. Brian, anything that you expect to see here?
I think that a lot of the field experience tends to show me that letter C is where a lot of folks are right now, and obviously gradually kind of moving and understanding that they need to start to get into custom apps. So I'll be interested to see what some of the results are.
So we got another moment or two. Encourage you guys to fill this in. Yeah, I mean, we typically see a nice even bell curve where different organizations are in different stages. Typically, the large Fortune 500, typically financial institutions and other regulated organizations are usually early adopters of these technologies and address these risks earlier on in the process. And less regulated and lesser sized organizations typically follow on. All right, so with that, why don't we show the results to the poll? Yeah, and we see a nice, even spread here. We still see a quarter of organizations not using MDM or mobile email yet, and I would expect that that's going to significantly change in the next 6 to 18 months. Another quarter are using a commercial MDM tool and only enabling mobile email, and I would imagine that that organizations in that bucket are starting to get demand for the next level of applications like file access, document editing for those email attachments, and even job-based, role-based applications. We see about 20% are moving beyond to those horizontal collaborative applications that I mentioned earlier, and nearly a third are already mobilizing business processes with off-the-shelf apps. So, and not very many at all, 0% in fact, are not writing custom apps, and that's actually quite common. Only the largest organizations typically have, a large development shop internally where they can start to not only write their own client server apps, but now start to put mobile front ends in. Oftentimes they don't have those, that specific development expertise internally. They may be looking at hiring a chop shop or a systems integrator, maybe not an Accenture, but somebody at the next level down, like a Cognizant or a regional consultant to help write applications, or it's not yet prioritized for their internal developers. So really, nothing surprising here. Different organizations are really all over the map in terms of where they reside. It really just depends on the maturity and which executives are screaming the loudest. Next slide. So when we, I speak with companies all over the country, all over the world, and when we go in there, they're often, you get different constituents, from IT, from InfoSec, from development, maybe even from the business unit around the table, and you ask them what the mobile strategy is, and there's very rarely a consensus on what their mobile strategy is. So as we come in and conduct workshops to help organizations prioritize and strategize, this is usually the method that we undertake. Number one, we have them go through an exercise where they prioritize the roles for mobilization, right? And as I mentioned before, sales often comes up as that top role that needs to be mobilized. But you also get knowledge workers, right? I think Brian touched on that in a Cisco survey, employees say they're more productive at home even than they are at the office, and that's because they have the tools they need to work without the distractions of the office. Knowledge workers really want to have full mobile office capabilities on their iPad or phone so they can look at documents, access documents, annotate and edit as they need, and then get them to the right people. Executives, right, are increasingly wanting to travel without full laptops, to actually use iPads or Android tablets as their choice of mobile tool. Field forces, right? You know, I think of the Maytag repairman, right, out there in the field conducting multiple visits a day. And these guys, you know, you have all different types of washing machines out there, right? That some may be very old, some may be very new, and they may not be experts in all of them, but they want to make sure they have access to their schedule. They want to make sure they have access to an expert maybe at the home office on a given model. They want to make sure they have access to all the documentation from some type of share site that they can access on a moment's notice to make the right repairs in a moment's notice. We also see other organizations wanting to mobilize non-employees. Partner networks are very important. I may be an insurance organization and I have agents who are not employees of the company and they may sell other products besides mine, but we want to give them mobile apps to get them the latest documentation, the most up-to-date information on policies, to take on claims when there's an accident and things of that nature. The next thing is, after you have a prioritized list of roles, start to look at the workflows that are important to them, right? For a sales guy, it may be, hey, they want to access their Salesforce.com securely or some other CRM. They want to be able to send an updated quote to a customer, even flip around the iPad in front of the customer, have them sign that quote right there on site to shrink the sales cycle, right? So understanding the tasks and workflows that each of these roles needs in priority. The next thing is looking at those enterprise systems that fuel the workflows. Do we have a mobile application for that application? Do we need to find one? The ones that we find, do they have the security in place that we need to protect data on the device in transit behind the firewall to the back-end system? And do we have the ability to enable DLP to protect that information from leaving the device if it's stored locally? So if you keep going, we call this disconnect between the workflows and the enterprise systems the mobile gap, right? And it's important to figure out, how do I start to connect my critical enterprise applications to the critical workflows I want to mobilize? So here's a very simple example, right? Looking to mobilize a sales team, and you know, oftentimes there are applications available to immediately fill that gap. So for example, you may start off with a sales team and, hey, we just got an MDM tool. We're going to enable Exchange Active Sync and email, right, to get them started. And now these sales guys are thrilled, right? They're getting email. They're able to respond to their customers even from the phone or a restaurant or wherever they may be, and they can be much more reactive and provide a better level of service to their customers when there's an issue or there's a need to quote a new upsell. Well, that begets now, hey, now I want SharePoint access because that's where all the latest collateral is. That's where the roadmaps are on the next versions of our products coming out that I want to be able to talk to when I'm in front of a customer. Well, now that I've got that, why can't I mobilize my CRM application? Why can't I get a signing application like a DocuSign or some other signing application? Why can't I, do Secure IM with CellTrust so that I can talk directly to a customer and tell them, hey, I just sent an updated quote. Can you please sign this and send it back to me via email, right, to shrink that sales cycle? And lastly, we're seeing progressive sales organizations even looking at building almost app mashups, custom dashboards, where they can pull their calendar from Good for tomorrow's meetings, pull the contact information from Good as well, so I have the latest information and the addresses of where I'm going. Look at LinkedIn, for example, to give me background information on the contacts. Go into Salesforce to pull the latest opportunity information. So that's all in front of me at a moment's notice at a single glance. So I'm ready to go tomorrow when I get in the car to hit my customers. Next slide, please. And so this is really where Good focuses now. While we started in secure mobile email with Good for Enterprise, which many of you may know, we've pulled the underpinnings of that secure application into a platform that we've built our own next generation of apps on, that we have partners like CellTrust building their apps on, and most importantly, our customers have the ability to build their custom apps on our platform as well. Within Good Dynamics, you have basic MDM, but more importantly, you have mobile application management. We allow our customers and our partners to containerize applications. So you don't need a dual persona where you cut over to like a hard business side of the phone where all the apps reside and the user has to leave his personal springboard. We allow you to containerize individual apps via our SDKs for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. And we also have wrappers, so you can take a pre-compiled APK or IPA file and integrate our security libraries and quickly roll them out to customers, to your employees. And this allows you to containerize the data within each of the apps, protecting the content, and allowing to apply data loss prevention policies to secure communications to applications behind the firewall, and make sure that everything is auditable and accountable. Right, so you can get your InfoSec and audit teams to sign off on the security controls that meet your own internal security policies or meet your regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're able to do with Good Dynamics is allow you, as I mentioned, to mobilize your own internal applications, even legacy applications that you haven't modernized to an Objective-C or some other modern language that allows you to easily mobilize them. We use a service-oriented architecture, what we call a services framework, that allows you to connect features of applications to that framework and then just write the front end so that it's very easy, even with a legacy application that even the developers who might have written it have long since left the organization. You can easily get those key features to a mobile front end to roll out to your employees. Next slide. And as you go through this mobile journey, we have different solutions to get you through each phase. Many customers start with our Good Enterprise Suite, which provides the base MDM, mobile application management, and our all-in-one Good Work, which is a next-generation secure email, calendar, contacts, file, and browsing solution. We have a secure browser that supports all your internal web proxies and different authentication schemes to allow your users to easily access web apps and other file shares and content behind your firewall. We also give you access to our wrappers and SDKs for your custom apps, and this includes all the encryption of that data at rest, in motion, even in use. Our collaboration suite takes you that next step with those other core productivity apps that we mentioned before, where you can add secure SharePoint, secure file shares, secure Microsoft OneDrive access, secure enterprise instant messaging with support for Microsoft Lync or IBM SameTime, and even access to good secured CRM apps like Salesforce One or Microsoft Dynamics. And then lastly, for organizations that are rapidly building apps, we provide you the full platform to secure those applications and roll them out in an unlimited basis to your users. We also have what we call mobile backend as a service capabilities. That's where we provide you those security capabilities I talked about before. We've also written a library of common platform services like high availability and disaster recovery, in addition to features and functions that are common that you may want to include in your app, like a printing service or a file access service, even a return to your previous app. Oftentimes, folks go through a multi-app workflow and get lost as to where they started and where they wound up. We allow you, as a feature, to just push back to the originating application. And that's called the Good Mobility Suite. So no matter where you are in your mobile journey, we can help you mobilize to get where you need to be, whether it's just email, whether it's extending that with some core apps, including our ISV ecosystem to fill in some gaps, or enabling your development organization or even your development partners to rapidly deploy mobile apps from existing enterprise applications or brand new apps they're building just for specific mobile functions. Next slide. And CellTrust is one of our biggest partners in our ISV ecosystem. Today we have over 100 apps that have been built on Good Dynamics, so that out of the box they're secure. They've leveraged our libraries. We pen test every app, and they go through a Veracode assessment, so that a VeriSign assessment, so that they have been certified secure by Good. And you can roll them out off the shelf through your relationship with one of these vendors, you may have their enterprise application and you want a secure mobile front end to deploy out to your users, or there may be a specific mobile app like CellTrust, custom built for mobility, that you need. Either way, some of these you can buy from Good, some you buy direct from the vendor, but they're all certified and ready to go out of the box. So that takes us to a final poll question. So what are your organization's third-party or custom mobile rollout plans for 2015? Many of you had said in the previous poll question that you're rolling out apps. Well, how many are you rolling out? 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 or more? I don't know, or none? Brian, any thoughts on what we might see?
You know, I think a lot of folks possibly don't know what they don't know out there. I think in terms of the core apps that everybody starts to think about when they're developing their mobile strategy, exactly like you said, it starts with email. They understand they need to protect that information. SMS and voice come pretty quickly, but there are so many different apps out there that you can put into your business to make yourself more effective, from the document sharing apps to printing apps like you mentioned. So I think being exposed to a partner that allows them to be educated on this ecosystem and what they could do with mobility becomes super, super important.
Great. You know, I expect we'll have a mix just like we did before. Why don't we see what the results are? Interesting. Just like you said, Brian, almost 70% don't know how many apps, and you know, I typically find that's because apps reside in so many places inside an organization. You know, email resides with IT in your Exchange organization. Different apps, you know, if you have Salesforce, could be part of IT, it could be part of your sales organization. Depends on how you decide to manage application services and application servers. So oftentimes, folks don't have clear visibility into all the projects that are going on. Surprised, though, that we don't have anybody that said 6 or more that had the guts to say that. But, you know, definitely different companies are in different stages of maturity, and, you know, everyone's doing something a little different. So that's the end of my slides. I want to thank Brian for having me on. You know, happy to answer any questions anybody has regarding the Good solution, or Brian, I'm sure, will be happy to answer any questions regarding CellTrust.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. To the audience out there, if there are questions, we'd love to be able to facilitate.
All right, great. This is Kyle again. We've had a few questions come in, and as Brian said, if anyone has any questions, please submit them via the question panel, and we will get to them. The first question we had come in, is SecureLine a BYOD only solution, or is it also for corporate-owned devices?
That's a great question. So the CellTrust SecureLine application can be deployed in either a corporate liable or BYOD type environment. I think where we are seeing more traction is within the BYOD space, primarily because organizations are, if they're deploying their corporate apps on someone's personal device, the organizations don't want them using their personal phone number for this type of communication. Number one, if they're using the personal side of it, it's not going to be auditable because they can't record and archive this communication. And number two, when that employee leaves, you know, let's say this is a financial firm and this is the case with broker-dealers, right? When that broker leaves the organization and he's working for ABC Bank today, more than likely tomorrow he's going to be working for XYZ Bank. And the customer would only know that broker by his cell phone number, which he's taking with. So yes, we are both corporate liable and we are BYOD. I think there's been more popularity in terms of the app inside the BYOD environment, but we can satisfy corporate liable solutions with different levels of integrations and carrier integrations as well.
All right, thanks. Another question we had is, earlier in the presentation, wearables were mentioned in one of the slides. How does both Good and CellTrust applications interface with some of the current wearables, such as the Apple and Samsung watches?
Well, I could take that from the Good side. Our iOS SDK now also supports wearables. So you can actually leverage our SDK to secure wearables apps that you're building internally or that you purchase. Secondly, Good Work does have a capability on iWatch that allows you to get email alerts. So you don't have to, you get the alert, you can see the subject and the sender and the time, and then you can decide whether you want to go to your phone to actually read the email or not. We also work with both, with a variety of different wearables as a two-factor authentication through some of our trusted authentication framework partners. So we have a variety of ways, either through apps or through, I would say, the Good Dynamics platform, to leverage wearables both as an extension to apps or as an extension to authentication.
Yeah, and I have to compliment a lot that the direction Jeff is going is very similar to the direction CellTrust is going. We have created applications for the Samsung devices as well as iOS, and really in our world, it becomes very much like a notification tool. So notifying that you've got or that you received a secure message or you have an incoming call. I mean, what we find from kind of user behavior is less folks are really responding in that mechanism. So there's going to be different variations. I also think that when it comes to wearables, we definitely have had a goal to make ourselves market ready. But on the other side of it, I think there's a lot of considerations that need to be put in place from the organizations in terms of their policies and procedures for wearables. And Good is thinking ahead of the curve too. I mean, I think from containerization on the mobile app to kind of virtual sub-containerization onto the mobile wearable really shows that they're ahead of the curve in terms of thinking the wearable direction.
All right, thanks, Brian. Next question we had come in: does compliance require recording and archiving of SMS communications?
Good question. So in highly regulated industries, there's variances, right? Depending on what type of vertical you may fall into. For financial services specifically, there are regulations that state that SMS messaging is a requirement in terms of archiving and retaining that information. Firms within the UK in financial services also have requirements of voice recording, whereas some organizations in the U.S. don't, haven't really kind of pressed the button there. But yes, SMS is required within financial services in terms of the archiving. And then within other organizations that are highly regulated, there certainly may not be defined requirements that they're being audited for, but it's information that they really feel the need to make certain that they have records of.
All right, great. The next question we had come in is probably best directed towards Jeff. So besides Exchange, what other Microsoft apps does Good support? Hi, Jeff, can you hear us?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Besides Exchange, Good also supports SharePoint. We also support MDM for Windows Phone, including Windows Phone 10, which is going to be coming up. We'll be releasing support for that from a device management perspective. We also support Microsoft Link, or OCS, for secure enterprise instant messaging that many of you have probably standardized on. We have a containerized version of it, and it actually integrates quite deeply with our email app. In fact, when you use Good Work for email, when you receive an email, you see the face of the person and their presence. There'll be a green dot or a red dot so that you can immediately click on that email and switch seamlessly over to a secure link session to communicate with that person. We also recently, Microsoft actually built on the Good Dynamics platform a version of Microsoft Dynamics CRM for Good, so that you have a Good Dynamics containerized version of the Microsoft Dynamics CRM app for iPad and recently iPhone.
All right, great. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
So the next question we had come in is, what security certifications does Good have?
Good has a variety of security certifications for organizations that are regulated or part of the government. We use FIPS validated encryption and have actually validated the methods with which we integrate it beyond just using a validated toolkit. We've also received Common Criteria EAL4 Plus certification for our secure email. We've also have authorities to operate in a variety of the defense agencies in the U.S. government, as well as similar approvals with defense agencies in, a dozen or more countries around the world. We also have certifications for UK CESG compliance, as well as France ANSSI, and Australia, they have another encryption standard which we support as well, and then dozens of more obscure ones I don't think anybody wants to hear about. But we've put in the time and investment to go through these regulatory approval processes and get these certifications to make it real easy for our customers, no matter what country or what industry they reside in, to get us quickly through their security review process. We've also passed hundreds of pen tests from customers all over the world.
All right, great. So I think we have time for just about one question, and one thing that I'd like to end with, and definitely this is open to both Jeff and Brian. So what are some future possible considerations that may need to be accounted for when developing a mobile strategy?
I'll kind of chime in and try not to be as much of a commercial for CellTrust as possible, but really I think one of the lacking things that a lot of folks have not considered are the voice and SMS pieces, and they are so critical. In the call I used the example of when I'm on the road and I'm doing business, what are the things on that mobile device that I'm using most? And they're SMS and voice, and really it's been one of these situations where we've had the opportunity to build integrations into corporate PBX systems and utilize their phone numbers and do different neat things like behind the carrier integrations with some of our partners. So really have had a lot of strength in that area. I think as time goes, you're going to see a transition into more of a not necessarily as much what you have, but who you are. So the different device types and the different screens that you could be on, the wearables, I think are going to continue to become more important, and the communication paths between these different devices talking between each other is going to be important to either encrypt or protect. So this whole cybersecurity awareness and protection of data just becomes essential to these mobile strategies. And groups like CellTrust and groups like Good are certainly here to consult with customers on these things. We've done our research. We've spent a ton of time in this space, both on the security side and on the usability and production side, that we'd love the opportunities to consult with the organizations and to see how we could help you in terms of getting through the mobile strategy.
Yeah, I think some of the advice that I give organizations around their mobile app strategy is, number one, don't start looking for nirvana, right? Some organizations overplan and they get stuck in paralysis by analysis, trying to build a super app. I often see the most successful companies building micro apps, trying to tackle the most common denominator, simple function that they know is going to add value and show quick wins, because it has then the after effect of allowing you to get future projects funded and approved. I also recommend don't always rush to native development. I see folks often say, oh, we got to get iOS developers, we got to build a native iOS app, it's got to look great. When you have form applications that are form-based where people are filling out data, and other ones that don't require a really sophisticated user experience, there's nothing wrong with doing hybrid, writing in Java or some other common web language, and then compiling. There's a ton of these web app tools that can help you compile into iOS or Android from a web app. It's perfectly acceptable, especially if it's not customer facing or it's, a very, non-sexy function. I think lastly, avoid projects that are a pet project of someone that may not be founded in a legitimate business need. Spending, all it's going to really lead to is wasted resources and poor acceptance by your users, which doesn't help anybody then in the long run further your program. So make sure it's validated. You spend a day in the life with a user who's a high priority role that you prioritize for mobilization. Understand what they do, what they need, what the back-end systems are. Don't assume and then waste a lot of time on something that no one's going to adopt. Right? It's only going to hamper you from getting that next project funded.
Great, thank you for that. So that's about all the time we have for today's webinar, The Journey Through Maturing a Mobile Strategy, Best Practices to Deploy Secure Archivable Business Apps, presented by CellTrust. Again, our presenters today were Jeff McGrath, Senior Director, Product Marketing at Good Technology, and Brian Panicko, Senior Vice President, Global Sales Strategy at CellTrust. Thank you, Jeff and Brian.
Thank you very much.